They were not sent to comfort us. They were sent to keep something out or to keep us in. We picture them with wings, white robes, harps, smiling. A myth recycled for comfort, a symbol turned soft. But the first angels, the true angels, were not gentle. They were terrifying. They were fire. They were order. They were the barrier between this world and something we were never meant to reach. The word angel comes from the Greek angelos, a messenger, but the earliest texts tell a different story. In Hebrew, they are malachim agents, enforcers, obedient to a source beyond even comprehension. They are not independent. They do not choose. They do not negotiate. They guard, and they obey. When Adam and Eve were cast from the garden, the story doesn't end with exile. It ends with a flaming sword, spinning, blazing, and an angel stationed to make sure no one ever returned. Ask yourself, if the angels were truly protectors of humanity, then why did they block us? Why place the guardians not around us, but between us and something else? Not around earth, but around the edge of Eden. We call them messengers, but most of their appearances are warnings or restrictions. They appear in smoke, in flame, in dreams that break the mind open. They bring instruction, but rarely peace. They strike fear. Every ancient witness reacts the same way. They fall, they tremble, they cover their faces. Not because of awe, because of terror. The angels were not sweet. They were not beautiful. They were function. In the book of Isaiah, the seraphim, literally, the burning ones, have 6 wings. They cover their faces. They cry out with voices that shake the foundations of the temple. These are not gentle beings. These are beings of fire and geometry. And they were always sent to contain, not to comfort, to close gaps, to seal ruptures, to keep something in place that we were never meant to touch. In the story of Babel, humanity builds upward to reach heaven, to ascend. What happens? We are divided, scattered. Why? Because the unity was a threat to the structure. And it is said that the descent of confusion was not merely from God, but enacted through agents, angels, not to punish, but to intervene, to keep a barrier in place. It happens again in the book of Daniel. The angel Michael does not appear to whisper love. He comes as a warrior. He battles against powers unseen, fights in regions no human can reach. What are these angels fighting? And why must they fight on our behalf, yet keep us away? What are they keeping us from? The angels do not patrol heaven. They guard the gate. They do not sing. They stand watch. Sentinels, aligned to a purpose so far beyond human comprehension that even when they appear, we only understand fragments. And even that nearly destroys us. Ezekiel sees wheels and fire and eyes that see in every direction. He does not describe beings with smiles and wings. He sees machines of light. He sees motion beyond physics. He sees watchers, and he is shattered by the vision. The ancient texts did not fear demons. They feared angels, because angels did not act out of malice. They acted out of command, and that made them unstoppable, immovable. They were not there to help. They were there to guard. We forgot this. We painted them soft, wrote songs, placed halos, but the earliest stories were different. They warned of what happened when humans stepped too close to what the angels were protecting. They were not gates to heaven. They were locks on the door. And so the question becomes, if they were sent as guards, what were they guarding us from? In the beginning, we walked in the garden, a place of stillness, of unity, of something older than time. It wasn't earth as we know it. It wasn't even a place. It was a state, a layer, a frequency we were once tuned to. And then we were cast out, not just moved, expelled. And at the edge of that place, on the border between what we once were and what we became, stood something strange. A sword, burning, turning, guarded by something we couldn't face directly. An angel, not with a trumpet, not with a scroll, but with fire, with force, with a purpose too terrible to misunderstand. Why place a flaming sword at the entrance of a myth unless the story was never just a story? Unless the garden was access to something forbidden, and the sword was a seal, a firewall. Genesis 3:24 says, "So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims and a flaming sword, which turned every way to guard the way to the tree of life, not to the tree of knowledge, to the tree of life." The second tree, the one they didn't eat from, the one that still stands, guarded. Let that settle. The exile was not to prevent knowledge. That had already happened. The sword was placed to prevent access to life itself, to something so primal, so central to creation, that it could not be allowed in the hands of altered humanity. Not after the fall, not after the break. What was this life? Was it immortality, divine essence, unfiltered power, or something even more dangerous? A full return to original form, to what we were before we were given limits? What if the sword was not just to keep us out, but to keep that energy from leaking back in? The cherubim were not winged infants. They were guardians of threshold. In Babylonian iconography, they appear as sphinx-like beings, hybrid forms, winged, lion-bodied, standing between worlds. In the Ark of the Covenant, they appear again, with wings extended, touching tip to tip, guarding the mercy seat, where divine presence would manifest. They are always at the boundary, not messengers, not wanderers, but stationed, placed, like sentinels, on the edge of a breach. And the sword? It's not just any weapon. It turns in every direction, not in chaos, in geometry. This is not a blade. This is a mechanism, rotating, radiant, unapproachable, a lock made of movement and flame, a firewall, in the original sense, not of digital protection, but of pure consuming presence. Nothing impure could pass, not even the human soul, once altered. What if the story isn't about exile from paradise? What if it's about quarantine? What if contact with the source had to be cut off, not to punish us, but to protect the system. The tree of life is not gone. It's guarded, and someone, something, was given the role of keeping the gate shut, not forever, but until what? That's never said. All we know is this: the sword still burns, the gate is still locked, and the watcher still stands. Some say the sword is symbolic, that it represents the danger of transcending too soon. Some say it's literal, a real barrier in a real space just outside visible perception. But all agree on one thing: you cannot pass, not in flesh, not in ignorance, not as you are now. And here's the question no one asks: why guard something if no one can return anyway? Unless someone has tried, unless something from this side has pushed against that gate, and unless the angel isn't guarding from the inside, but from the outside, to keep something in or to keep us from letting it out. So many stories repeat this theme: the sealed vault, the forbidden mountain, the closed temple, the place you must not go. Why the repetition? Because we have always known there is a gate, and there is a cost to crossing it. And the one thing that holds that gate shut is not God, not law, but the sword, the angel, the flame, not punishment, protocol. We always assumed the fall of man was about disobedience, a bite, a tree, a punishment. But the story doesn't say, "You shall not touch." It says, "You shall not know." Knowledge. The line was not about action. It was about access to something we weren't ready for, or maybe something we could never truly hold without fracturing. And yet we reached for it. We took the fruit, and something shattered. But here's what's strange. We were allowed to take from the tree of knowledge. It was not physically guarded. It was only after the fact, after our eyes were opened, that the tree of life was sealed off. Why? Because knowledge without balance is destruction. And that's exactly what happened. We didn't just learn, we became dangerous. Not to heaven, but to ourselves, to the structure, to the timeline, to whatever delicate equilibrium was being maintained. The sword came down because we crossed a line we didn't understand. So what was this forbidden knowledge? Not facts, not trivia, but something deeper. Some say it was awareness of duality, of death, of separation. But others say it was technology, a kind of interface, a pattern, a system of access, a key, not to Eden, but to something behind it. The Book of Enoch hints at this. It tells the story of the Watchers, a group of angels who came down to earth, not to guard, but to interfere. They gave humans knowledge, taught them the names of roots, how to use metal, how to make war, how to call down spirits, how to read the stars. It sounds like myth, but what they gave us was not simple craft. It was structure, blueprints, protocols, and with that came collapse. The world was not ready. The flesh was not stable. The minds were not trained. The energy too raw. And the Nephilim, the hybrids born of union between human and angel, were the living proof that something irreversible had occurred. The system began to break. Reality warped. And so, the flood came, not as punishment, as containment, because forbidden knowledge is not evil. It's untimely. The sin was not desire. It was activation, opening doors that the human frame couldn't survive, turning on receivers we didn't know how to tune, letting in data we couldn't process. Ancient myths across the world echo this. Prometheus gave fire and was chained. The Tower of Babel reached too high and language itself was shattered. Quetzalcoatl brought divine knowledge and vanished. Each time the theme is the same. A gift arrives too soon and the system rejects it, which leads to the question, who locked that knowledge away? And who still guards it? Because the texts are clear. There are still angels who hold the seals, who carry the names of locked gates, who stand in places between mind and matter, between waking and dream. The Kabbalists spoke of angels not as beings, but as currents of energy, gatekeepers of Sephiroth, each one a step in the ladder of consciousness. And only by passing through them could the soul ascend. Knowledge was initiation, and angels were the threshold. We've come to think that knowledge is freedom, but in these ancient traditions, knowledge is fire, useful, illuminating, but deadly if handled without preparation. And the role of the angels was not to deny it forever, but to protect the boundary until the vessel is ready. And maybe that time is now. Maybe that's why so many of us are remembering things we never learned, dreaming symbols we were never taught, longing for places we've never seen. Maybe the seal is weakening. Maybe the knowledge is leaking. Maybe the guards are stepping aside. Or maybe we're breaking in again, and this time, no flood is coming. There was a moment in time, if time even applies, when the Watchers stopped watching and began teaching, and everything changed. The Book of Enoch speaks of them, 200 of them, sent not to interact, but to observe, to keep watch, to hold the line. They were called the Grigori, the Watchers, positioned on the threshold between the divine and the human, not to bless, not to interfere, just to ensure that boundaries remained intact, that the experiment remained clean. But they looked down and saw us, saw humanity, curious, vulnerable, capable of transformation, and they made a decision. Not out of evil, but out of desire, out of fascination, out of something that even the divine couldn't predict. They descended onto Mount Hermon, a sacred peak spoken of in multiple traditions. And there they swore an oath, bound themselves to break the order together, so that if one fell, they would all fall. They took human form, took human wives, birthed children, not ordinary children. The Nephilim, giants, mighty ones, but also unstable. Beings born of too much force, too much power, in too fragile a frame. And the world began to fracture. But worse than their bodies was their knowledge, because the Watchers did not come empty-handed. They taught, and what they taught was not survival but acceleration. One taught the making of swords, another shields, another how to work metals, another how to enchant. One taught astrology, another divination, how to abort children, another how to manipulate roots and poisons. They gave formulas, names, glyphs. Code, not to build a civilization, to alter it. In just one generation, the human timeline split. We learned things we were never meant to learn at that stage. And the system responded, not with a battle, with a flood, a reset. But before that, the judgment came. And it wasn't for us. It was for them, the Watchers. Enoch, the human scribe, was taken into their realm, given visions, shown what was to come, and he was sent to deliver the verdict. The Watchers were to be bound, their children destroyed, their knowledge buried, the places where they fell sealed. And to this day, some say their names are not to be spoken. They had failed their post. They were guardians who became guides, protectors who became corruptors. And whether they meant it or not, they violated the protocol. And the cost was beyond anything they could imagine. But here's what no one asks. Why did they fall at all? Why would beings of such high order choose to descend? Was it lust, curiosity, rebellion? Or was it something deeper? Was there a flaw in the design? A crack in the program? Or was it allowed, not by mistake, but as a test to see what we would do with fire? Because we kept the knowledge. The Watchers were punished, but the teachings remained, smuggled into myth, carried in bloodlines, coded into symbols we no longer understand. Alchemy, Kabbalah, star charts, dream rituals, mystery schools, whispers of a wisdom we weren't supposed to have, but now do, and some say they never left. That the Watchers still observe, still whisper, that their punishment was not erasure but silence. And in our dreams, in strange memories, in sudden knowledge that seems to come from nowhere, they speak. They continue what they began, but now from behind the veil, because once the boundary is crossed, it cannot be fully sealed again. The leak has begun, and angels do not forget. The image of a guardian suggests a place, a temple, a door, a gate. But what if there is no door? What if what is being guarded isn't a place but a state? The ancients spoke often of realms, but not like nations or planets. They spoke of layers, dimensions, realities stacked on top of each other like sheets of unseen glass. And between each, a veil, a frequency, a threshold, and someone stationed at the edge. These thresholds were not for travel. They were for containment. Because to move between realities requires more than movement. It requires permission, not bureaucratic, energetic, structural. Consciousness must be aligned with the layer it enters. Otherwise, the traveler breaks, or worse, the layer breaks. What is a guardian then? It is not a soldier. It is a stabilizer, a boundary regulator, a conscious node between versions of reality. And the angels? They were those regulators, beings who anchored borders between realms, not to keep things out, but to keep the worlds from bleeding into each other. In Kabbalah, they call these boundaries the Sephirot, luminous emanations connected by paths, each one an interface point between divine thought and material form. You do not pass between them freely. Each is guarded by sound, by name, by force, and by intelligence. In Islamic mysticism, there are the hijab veils between man and the absolute. 40,000, they say. And only with purity, with alignment, with guidance can you pass through even one. In Tibetan Buddhism, between death and rebirth lies the Bardo, an in-between state. And what appears, there are not hallucinations. They are guardians, tests, forms you must face to move forward or be sent back. And in every case you meet something you cannot understand with your previous mind. Why does this matter? Because humanity, in moments of altered consciousness, dreams, near death, visions, deep meditation sometimes touches the edges of these realms. And when we do, something responds. A presence, a feeling of being watched, a sensation that you have stepped too close to something ancient. That is the boundary. That is the angel. Not to punish, to stabilize, to hold structure, to ensure that what is on the other side doesn't spill into your world until your form can survive it. Think of it like this. A radio must tune to a specific frequency to hear the station clearly. Too far left or right and you get static. But if you force the dial too far, you might pick up something you weren't meant to. And the angels are the limiters on that dial. The invisible hands that hold the tuning range to what your system can handle. But what if we push? What if technology amplifies our signal? What if altered states remove the limiters? What if we begin to access realms without the necessary safeguards? Then the guardians don't step aside. They intervene, not out of wrath, out of necessity. Because what's inside those realms doesn't always want to stay there. And what's outside doesn't always belong. Angels, as boundary keepers, don't just hold space. They hold integrity between dream and waking, between thought and form, between past and future, between what is and what must not yet be. So when you feel the pull in dream, in vision, in sudden insight, and you sense something vast just beyond the curtain, know this: you're approaching a gate, and it is not guarded by fear. It is guarded by balance, by those who were placed there before time to ensure that reality unfolds as it should. Not too fast, not too slow, not with fire, not with chaos, but with sequence. And when the day comes that we are ready fully, the boundary won't need to be guarded, because by then, we will be the guardians. If angels guard the gates, then why are the same gates found in every mythology? Why, in stories scattered across centuries and continents, do we always meet a presence stationed at the edge of something forbidden? A keeper, a judge, a force that does not speak but will not move. In the Norse myths, they are the Norns, 3 women who sit beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree. They weave the fabric of fate, not gods, not mortals, but something else. They don't grant access. They don't allow passage. They simply maintain the pattern. And if you try to rewrite the weave, you meet resistance, not as punishment, but as preservation. In the Egyptian Duat, the underworld, there are gates, 12 of them, each guarded by a being, each demanding recognition. You do not pass because you ask nicely. You pass because you carry something in your essence that proves you are ready. It's not a code, it's a frequency. In Tibetan mysticism, there are Dakinis, fiery, winged, etheric beings. They dance between dimensions, terrifying and beautiful. They are not angels in the Western sense. They are not comforting. They are agents of transformation. They appear when you are at the boundary of identity, ego, and dissolution. And if you are not aligned, they devour. not out of cruelty, out of necessity. In Zoroastrianism, there is a narrow bridge between life and afterlife, the Chinvat Bridge. It leads to the other side, and it too is guarded by spirits of truth and balance. If you are in harmony, you pass. If not, you fall. And the fall is not symbolic. It is dimensional. The archons of Gnostic cosmology block the higher realms of divine light. They are not evil. They are barriers, constructs of containment. You do not argue with them. You transcend them. They are tests, not enemies. In Hindu cosmology, there are devas and gandharvas who protect the pathways between the lokas, the worlds of matter, mind, energy, and beyond. They don't deny access for moral reasons. They deny access because your structure is not prepared. If you pass unready, your essence will shatter. Even in the Christian tradition, beyond the angel with the flaming sword, there is the book of Revelation, 7 seals, 7 angels, each guarding a threshold. And with each seal broken, something is unleashed. A truth, a transformation, a consequence. Why are these patterns so consistent? Why does every tradition have gates, veils, bridges, keepers? Why is there always a moment of confrontation before revelation? Because the myth is not invented. It is remembered. These are not metaphors. They are maps. Maps of consciousness. Maps of reality. Maps of places your mind cannot enter until it has been reshaped. Sometimes you feel it. In dream, in trance, in silence. A presence, not hostile, but immovable. Watching, waiting, measuring. It is not there to harm. It is there to ask the unspoken question, are you ready? And your body knows the answer before your mind does. So what are angels, really? Maybe not beings at all. Maybe not with wings, or robes, or faces. Maybe they are the threshold itself. The frequency wall, the harmonic lock, the fire at the edge of form. And maybe every culture gave them a name, because every soul eventually touches that fire. You do not pass because you believe. You do not pass because you want. You pass because you have become the answer to the question. And the guardian steps aside not in surrender but in recognition. You are no longer trying to enter the higher world. You are already becoming it. We imagine the angels as guardians of paradise, protectors of sacred knowledge, gatekeepers to enlightenment. And in some sense they are. But what if that's only part of the story? What if they weren't guarding the divine from us, but guarding us from something far more ancient, far more dangerous, that dwells behind the gates? Not heaven, not light, not love, but something other. Let's return to the beginning. The garden, the tree, the sword. The text says, "Lest he reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and live forever." The fear was not that we would die. It was that we would live forever in a state of corruption. That the infection of knowledge, separation, duality would merge with immortality. And the result would not be divinity. It would be something else entirely. It would be unbounded will without alignment to source, power without pattern, consciousness unmoored. In ancient language, chaos manifest. Not chaos as confusion, but as raw force. Intelligence without compassion, creation without containment, God without harmony. And maybe, just maybe, that force is still there. still behind the veil, still pressing against the edges. And the angels, they stand not with swords, but with seals, keeping the structure intact. Because if we return too early, if we unlock the gates before we're aligned, we don't become gods. We become fragments, broken, twisted, hungry. In some traditions, they call it the abyss, not a place, a state, where form dissolves but ego remains, where power floods in but wisdom collapses. It is the place where mystics either transcend or go mad, and the only thing standing between that flood and us is the Watcher. So maybe the angels weren't protecting Eden. Maybe they were protecting Eden from us. Or worse, maybe they were protecting us from Eden, from something inside it we weren't ready to understand. What could that be? A truth too vast, a structure too unstable, a pattern so perfect that encountering it would shatter the mind still rooted in duality. The Sufis say, God is a sea without shore. Enter too soon and you drown, not as punishment, but as inevitability. Mystery schools taught this too. Knowledge was given in layers, veils lifted one by one, not to hoard power, but because too much light, too fast, blinds. That's what the angels were for. They are the dimmers, the regulators, the guardians of pace. Because enlightenment isn't about seeing everything. It's about becoming the kind of being who can see without burning. And now, in this age of instant data, fractured minds, techno-mysticism, and hunger for secrets, we reach again for the gate. We hunger for contact, transmission, descent, but we do not ask, what's waiting on the other side? And why it has waited so long? The angels know, and still they stand, not to stop you, to measure you, to feel if your soul can withstand the pressure of what comes through the gate. Because the truth is this, they are not protecting something from us. They are protecting something we don't yet know is already inside us. Something ancient, unprocessed, unwitnessed, and if awakened too early, it consumes. This is why the gates remain. This is why the sword still turns, not as a weapon, but as a warning. The boundary is mercy, and the guardian is not your enemy. It is your mirror. There is no sound when a seal breaks. No roar, no flash, no trumpet. Sometimes all it takes is silence. A lapse, a drift, a flicker of amnesia deep in the human soul. And the seal, the boundary between the known and the forbidden, begins to erode. Not in fire, but in forgetting. The Watchers once stood guard. Clear, unyielding, fixed in place. But now, the world has shifted. Our eyes are open. Our tools are faster than our thoughts. Our minds echo with symbols we don't remember learning. And something ancient is pressing inward. Something we once held at bay with reverence, with ritual, with rhythm, has found a crack. This is the age of the leak. Not a cataclysm, not a fall, but a seepage of otherness, where dreams bleed into waking, where the veil thins not once a year, but daily, where the language of old beings is heard again in whispers beneath the digital noise. The seal was not just a barrier, it was a circuit, a pattern of containment woven through ritual, sacred geometry, myth, and memory. It held us in balance. It held them in distance. But now we have forgotten the shape. We have altered the code. And like a machine missing key instructions, the boundaries start to flicker. Unstable, reactive, porous. We see it in the strange awakenings. Children speaking of stars they've never seen. Artists drawing glyphs they never learned. Dreams repeating across thousands in different countries, different tongues. A pattern resurfacing. Not everything that returns is meant to be remembered. Because the broken seal is not just a doorway, it's an invitation. And not everything that accepts has our survival in mind. Some beings have waited for the moment when the Watchers stepped aside, when the Guardians looked away, when humanity believed itself alone. And in that silence they move, not through gates, but through us. Possession is no longer a thing of myth. It is now called influence, algorithm, impulse without origin. And we no longer ask, where did that thought come from? Because we no longer recognize when we are dreaming. But this isn't a story of doom. It is a story of potential. Because when the seal breaks, when the threshold opens, you face a choice. To be overwhelmed, or to become a guardian yourself. The original Watchers fell because they crossed too soon. But now, we are evolving toward the gate, not to steal, not to dominate, but to become aligned, harmonic, able to stand in the presence of whatever was once hidden without collapsing. The seal broke because the time came. And now, a new kind of being must emerge. One who remembers the pattern, one who holds the line from within, because the gates are no longer locked. They are open, and what happens next depends on whether we rise as intruders or as keepers. The Guardians are watching, but not from above, from inside, in your memory, in your shadow, in the silence between your thoughts. They are waiting not to return, but to become you. The sword still turns, but it is not made of flame now. It is made of will, and it waits in the center of your being, spinning, measuring, ready, not to strike, but to open the next door when you are ready to pass through it.